Norman Vincent Peale was a American pastor about 100 years ago. Not very popular, huge congregation. And his most famous book is The Power of Positive Thinking. Donald Trump, their family went to his church, I read somewhere. Well, he advocated a worry-breaking formula. First thing every morning before we get up, we should say out loud, I believe, 3 times. John Stott comments, but he does not tell us in what we are so confidently and repeatedly to affirm our belief. The last words of his book are simply, so believe and live successfully. But believe what? Believe whom? That says John Stott. Luke chapter 18 and in verse 42, Jesus says to this blind man, receive your sight, your faith has healed you. Here is someone who believed. And his was a saving faith, because literally it says your faith has saved you. Here is saving faith. And we're going to explore what saving faith is. And I think we should translate it, your faith has saved you. That's what, just in the context, back in chapter 18, verse 26, earlier in the chapter, when Jesus has been speaking about the camel going through the eye of a needle. Those who heard this said, who then can be saved? That's the same word here in the immediate context about salvation. The first time it's a phrase that Luke returns to repeatedly. Luke is interested in saving faith. Back in chapter 7 and verse 50, after Jesus had been the sinful woman who had ministered to Jesus, poured perfume on his feet, and so on. At the end of Luke chapter 7 and verse 50, Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. It's exactly the same phrase. Your faith has saved you. Clearly, that's salvation. He's spoken of earlier of her sins being forgiven. Your faith has saved you. Again, in chapter 8 and verse 48, you remember the woman in the crowd who had reached out to touch Jesus' clothes, and she was healed of the bleeding that had afflicted her for 12 years. In Luke chapter 8, verse 48, then he said to her, daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Healed you, saved you. He says the same thing to Jairus on that occasion in a couple of verses later, Luke 8, verse 50, when the message comes that Jairus' daughter has died. Hearing this, Luke 8, verse 50, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe and she will be saved. Believe, she will be saved. Again, in chapter 17 of Luke and verse 19, when Jesus heals 10 lepers and one returns to give thanks. In Luke 17 and verse 19, then Jesus said to the leper who returned, the Samaritan, rise and go, your faith has saved you, literally made you well as it's translated there, but saved you. And so I think that's how we should understand it here. Your faith has saved you. Yes, it saved him from his blindness, it saved her from her bleeding, it saved him from his leprosy, but there's something more in this salvation, as we'll see. So what is saving faith? Well, first of all, saving faith recognizes who Jesus is. Saving faith recognizes who Jesus is. Jesus has approached Jericho. There's a blind man by the roadside, and there's this crowd following, and this hubbub. He wants to know what's going on. He can't see. He asks what was happening. And they told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. That's how the crowd identifies Jesus. He's Jesus the Nazarene, Jesus from Nazareth. Perhaps that's distinguishing Jesus from other Jesuses. There are other Jesuses in the New Testament. Josephus mentions a number of people called Jesus. It was a popular name. This is Jesus of Nazareth, the place where he comes from. Verse 30, he called out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. He doesn't say, Jesus of Nazareth, have mercy on me. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. He recognizes who Jesus is more than the crowd. Even though he's blind, he sees who Jesus is, the Son of David. Well, that's a reference that was used of the Messiah. So in chapter 20 of Luke and verse 41, when Jesus has arrived in Jerusalem, he says to those who gathered around him, Luke 20, verse 41, Jesus said to them, how is it that they say the Christ is the Son of David? Well, he is the Son of David. Jesus is going to show that he's more than the Son of David, because David calls him Lord in one of the Psalms. But the Christ is the Son of David. That's a truth that was drawn from Old Testament prophecy. God's promise to King David, when David wanted to build a temple and build a house for God, God says, no, I'll build a house for you. In 2 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 12, the Lord declares, when your days are over, speaking to David, and you rest with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So a offspring of David will be the forever king that God will send. That truth is taken up then in Jeremiah, the other prophets, but for instance in Jeremiah 23 and verses 5 and 6, there the Lord declares, Jeremiah 23 verses 5 and 6, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up to David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will live in safety. This is the name by which he will be called, the Lord, our righteousness. So here is this descendant of David, a king whose kingdom will be forever, but from Jeremiah, a saving king, the king who will save, the king appointed by God over his kingdom, who brings salvation and deliverance. Son of David, the blind man cries. How much he understood, but we know that he understood that Jesus was God's promised saving king. And so he cries out for Jesus. He knew that Jesus had real power, not like King Charles. He's got no real power. Jesus has real power. And so this man cries out for Jesus to have mercy on him. Jesus, Son of David, God's promised saving king, have mercy on me. Have you recognized who Jesus is? Do you see Jesus as just some moral teacher, some fine example that we should follow, some good man? No, Jesus is God's saving king. Saving faith recognizes who Jesus is, God's saving king. Have you recognized who Jesus is? But saving faith is more than that. The demons who Jesus cast out, they recognized who Jesus was. You're the Holy One of God if you come to torment us. No, Saving faith, so first of all, recognizes who Jesus is, but then secondly, realizes personal need of Jesus. He called out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And he won't be silenced. Those who led the way rebuked him, told him to be quiet. Shh, you don't want this disturbance. But he shouted out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. He had a personal need that he knew Jesus could meet. And so he wasn't going to be shut up by other people. He had to get Jesus' attention because he had a personal need that he knew Jesus could meet. Have mercy on me, he cries. Pity me. He's asking Jesus to respond to his misery. That's what pity and mercy is. It's a response to misery. That's why when charities want us to give to them, they have poor-looking dogs that are meant to touch our. We pity these poor animals, or children who are starving, trying to get us to respond to misery. Well, that's what he's crying out for Jesus. Have mercy on me. Look at my miserable situation. Pity me. And we know that's the sense of the word. Back in chapter 16 of Luke and verse 24, the story of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16. Verse 24, the rich man is in hell in torments. He looks up to Abraham and Lazarus by his side. Luke 16:24. So he called to Abraham, Father Abraham, have pity on me, same word. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue because I am agony in this fire. Have pity. My situation is miserable. Have mercy on me. Similarly, with the lepers in chapter 17, those 10 lepers. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Think of their miserable situation. They had to stand at a distance. They were cut off from their community. We had the lockdown, didn't we, during COVID? But imagine being in a continual lockdown. That's what it was like for them. How miserable. Jesus, Master, have pity, have mercy. And back in chapter 10, the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, ministered to that man who had been beaten up and left for dead. When Jesus said, who was that man's neighbor? The man says, the one who had pity on him. So that's what this man is crying out for Jesus to have pity. Think of the misery of blindness. We just sang, didn't we? All things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful. He gave us eyes to see them. Imagine not being able to see the glories of creation. Your family. Misery. And then that misery is compounded for this man because he's begging. He's sitting by the roadside begging. His blindness is drawn him into poverty, and he's begging for people to give money so that he might live and survive. And so he cries out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Son of David, have mercy on me. My situation is miserable. And I'm applying to Jesus because I know that I've got a personal need that Jesus can meet. Have you realized your personal need of Jesus? It's one thing to recognize who Jesus is, but have you realized your personal need of Jesus? That you need him to deal with your miserable situation. Because sin brings us into misery. For all its promises, sin brings us into bondage. Sin brings guilt. Sin brings God's curse and condemnation. Sin brings judgment. And as we look in our society, lives miserable as people give vent to their sinful desires. Sin brings misery. Have you realized that Jesus can deal with your personal need? The misery that sin has brought into your life, whatever shape that has taken for you. Jesus can do something for you. Recognizing who Jesus is, realizing that personal need of Jesus. And so the hymn we're going to sing in a moment says, "Come, you sinners, poor and wretched, weak and wounded, sick and sore. Jesus ready stands to save you, full of pity, joined with power. He is able, he is willing, doubt no more." This man had no doubt. Jesus can help. No one's going to put me off. Jesus can deal with my personal misery. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. So saving faith recognizes who Jesus is, God's promised saving King, realizes the personal need of Jesus. But then thirdly, relies on Jesus for salvation. So you recognize who Jesus is, yes. You realize your personal need of Jesus, but then it's relying on Jesus for salvation, entrusting yourself to him individually, personally, to save. I think that's what goes on when the man is brought to Jesus. Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. When he came near, Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord, I want to see," he replied. Remember, he was begging. He could have said, "Oh, well, could you give me some silver?" That's what the man at the Golden Gate thought when Peter and John came. He thought he was going to get some money. Maybe this man thought, well, it'd be helpful if I had some money. No, Lord, I want to see. And in saying that, he entrusts himself to Jesus to do something. He personally, here is my need. I'm bringing my personal need to you to do something, to act for me and on my behalf. He applies personally and directly to Jesus. He puts his trust in Jesus for his specific need. He puts his confidence in Jesus to transform things for him. So saving faith, I think Luke is telling us here in this incident, is not just recognizing who Jesus is, not just realizing our personal need of Jesus, but relying on Jesus individually and personally for his transforming power in our lives. A couple of weeks ago, one of my fillings fell out. It's tender and sensitive. Well, we've got a good dentist. Thankfully, we've got a dentist in Grantham. We're on their list. So I know the dentist. And, well, I had a personal need of that dentist. But it wouldn't do me any good until I lay down on that dentist chair, had the injections, and had that tooth repaired. Mended, thankfully. It is. But that's, see, there's faith. It's one thing to know about the dentist and know that that dentist could meet my personal need because they'd done other fillings. I had to go and lie down and trust that dentist to do the job. And she did. This man trusted Jesus. Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight. Your faith has saved you." Again, the hymn we're going to sing in a moment says, "Lo, the incarnate God ascended, pleads the merit of his blood. Venture on him, venture wholly. Let no other trust intrude. That's relying on Jesus, venturing on Jesus, venturing wholly. Let no other trust intrude. None but Jesus can do helpless sinners good. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus. But where's Jesus going? That's why we read those earlier verses. Verse 31, we are going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written by the prophets about the Son of Man will be fulfilled. He will be turned over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, insult him, spit on him, flog him, and kill him. That's how Jesus saves sinners. That's how Jesus delivers as God's King, by going to the cross and taking all that our sin deserves in order that we might be redeemed and forgiven and pardoned and given new life. And so on the third day, he rose again. He follows Jesus on the road to Calvary. Now he can see. He keeps looking at Jesus. He's following Jesus. His eyes are on Jesus, even if it means going to Jerusalem and all that Jesus will now suffer. His eyes are on Jesus. His eyes see Jesus, his feet follow Jesus, and his lips praise God for Jesus. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they also praised God. Saving faith. Recognizing who Jesus is, God's promised saving King. Realizing our personal need of Jesus, that sin has brought misery, and only Jesus can save and deliver. And then relying on Jesus individually, personally, entrusting ourselves to Jesus to save, to deliver, to transform us by his divine power. The one who suffered and died that we might be saved. Remember, American preacher saying once, someone said to him once, I wish I had your faith. And he said, well, you do have my faith. You're just putting it in something else. We all trust something. We all believe in something. Do you believe in Jesus in the way that we've described? Do you trust him? Do you rely on him? Do you put your confidence in Jesus for life and for eternity? For your standing with God? You're not trusting in yourself. That was Norman Vincent Peale. You believe in yourself. No, you don't. You believe in Jesus, the one who suffered and died so that you could be saved, so that you could see what life is really about, so that you could see the truth of the judgment to come, and the one who can bring you through to eternal joy. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. Has that happened for you? Yet, trust in the Lord. He is able to save. He is willing. He's full of pity, joined with power. Trust him, the Saviour. We're going to sing that hymn together. Come, you sinners, poor and wretched, weak and wounded, sick and